you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Hello and welcome to Visiting the Village. I'm Paul Kilduff-Taylor and with me is the axiomatic Ian Hardingham.
This week I'm going to be launching my new album in a party on a Tribes 2 server based in Finland. That's going to work out great.
Let's get out of this dungeon.
It's the top story.
Street Fighter V came out this week with some complaining about the lack of content, particularly single-player story campaigns, in the launch version. Top fighting game expert chap Patrick Miller wrote a very considered analysis of the launch at Gamasutra, arguing that Capcom are aiming for a more streamlined esports approach, rather than adding more complex features or trying to bring in casual single-player fans. Ian Hardingham, what do you make of Capcom's approach?
This is really fascinating. I feel like this has been coming for a while, and now this is here. It's a question that we've talked about a bit in the past. It's basically, if you're trying to make an esport, what does that product look like? How much single player does it have to have? How much of a gamble are you taking? You know, basically saying esport or bust. Spoiler, a big gamble. And I had no idea when it was going to be shown as clearly as it has been in Street Fighter V. There's a huge amount here. You're right, it's a great article. It's interesting to think about how long it's been since Street Fighter 4 came out. I still think of in my mind as Street Fighter 4 being quite a recent thing, but it's been out for years and years and years. There's so much here to cover. We're going to have to do it in order. Let's start off with the question: if they're really going for for pro gaming, why is this not a free-to-play game?
Well, that is a very big point that this article makes. It kind of sees them sort of hanging on dogmatically to this business model of the past. And of course, there's this thing of them, you know, releasing ongoing DLC. I think maybe they feel like they just want to bank on, you know, some kind of existing love from the community in terms of this model's going to work for them sort of sustained over a long time. If they get that big payoff, you know, kind of right at the start with the launch, I think they're probably just not ready to move out of that business model.
Absolutely. Who would want to, you know, decide not to get a huge many millions of dollars on your launch? I mean, that's going to be a really tough thing to give up on. But I do think that it's slightly undermining what they're doing, given how many other decisions are based around a thing that would be more appropriate for free-to-play. Now, I think that there are some aspects of the criticism that are, you know, maybe unfair, but I think that if you're getting this much criticism of this kind, I think there's actually a problem with the product. I've got no problem with them only having 16 characters. 16 still seems a lot to me.
Yeah.
When I had a fighting game back in the 90s, I was lucky to get 16. Apparently, Street Fighter 4 launched with 3 times that number, but that just seems a bit crazy. That's not a problem for me. But not having like a decent tutorial and a good bit of single-player stuff for each character definitely seems like a big problem to me. You know, it just seems a bit misapplied. Obviously, Street Fighter is a big enough brand that you can get away with doing some stuff wrong and not having as much new user introduction stuff because it's so popular already. But you're still, in order to have an esport, you still got to get people to start playing it. You've got to have a good initial experience. And I think we both agree that people are always going to want to play single player first. Not all people, but enough people.
Well, this is in a really weird place because, of course, a lot of the most popular esports are online only and multiplayer only. And that means that if you kind of want to be in that space, I think you can say, you know, oh, well, maybe some cursory single player is enough. But I really feel with Street Fighter that the multiplayer is so hardcore and it's so difficult to get through that early ramp up that you really need something, you know, some way in. If I'm a kind of semi-casual player of fighting games, which I guess I am, and I've been trying to get into Street Fighter 4, I think that looking at this, I almost prefer to stick with Street Fighter 4 for a bit, just because it feels like a fleshed out thing. And if I did want to play single player, then I could do that. And that's not good. Like that, I don't think I should be feeling like that at this point.
Yeah, this almost feels like a paid beta to me. I bought Shroud of the Avatar last week, and Shroud of the Avatar, I believe, is going to be free to play when it comes out. But it's $50 now, as a lot of these games are prestige games. They charge for their beta even when they're going to be free to play eventually, and it almost feels like that's what they're doing here. There's something else that I want to talk about beyond the pro gaming aspect, which is the netcode stuff.
Yeah.
I've always been a bit cynical that netcode was ever going to be good enough to work with these games. You're always going to have a massive problem. Fighting games are about like individual frames. The timing is so intense, and I basically just don't believe that there's a solution that works unless you're operating on a very low lag, and more importantly than it being low, like actually more importantly, it being consistent. Something that's like 20 milliseconds for the majority of the time, but spikes is probably worse than something that's reliably 50 milliseconds for the entire time. There's some talk about, there are two basic approaches to this, one of which is that it sort of delays your input with the lag, and the other is this frame rollback thing, which means that when stuff gets a bit spiky, it just goes back in time. Both sound to me like they're kludges. I mean, I think that they, kludge may be the wrong word, but they're just not going to necessarily solve the problem. So this guy says that he's optimistic that once the massive launch rush is over and the servers are kind of under control, this is going to be a better experience. It probably is going to be a decent experience, but I doubt that this is the game that gets online fighting game networking right.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a big kind of clash and debate in the fighting game community over, which games have the good netcode. And I think there are some people who are nostalgic for some kind of like Street Fighter Alpha thing on the 360 that had really good netcode. Like, that's the holy grail, right? So you're right. It's down to people liking different styles of things. I think it's called something like GPPO, the system, where it rolls back the frames. It kind of aggregates the lag and then it decides to roll back a bit and resync everything. When I read about that description in Abstract, and I have sort of seen that happen when watching Street Fighter streams and stuff, it sounds really terrible. Like, it sounds like you're creating effectively like a big random spike occasionally. That's going to really, really throw people off. But it seems like it works pretty well. I mean, I know a lot of the top Street Fighter 4 pros do spend a significant amount of time playing online multiplayer, perhaps a lot more than, for example, Smash players do, because the multiplayer is so terrible. So obviously it has worked in the past, but I agree with you. I mean, I don't think this is going to be a revolutionary solution to that problem by any means.
Yeah, I think this rollback system, is actually sort of the same kind of paradigm as Counter-Strike uses. Counter-Strike always had a really unusual netcode system, which basically kind of allows you to hit people who are on your screen and will actually reverse time for them. If they had gone further because of the lag than they did on your screen, then you still score a hit. I think it's kind of sort of a little bit similar to that conceptually. Anyway, yeah, maybe Street Fighter V, through several years of development from now, will work out what's actually important to make this work online. Because let's be really clear here, this is only going to be a pro game if it's played online.
Yeah.
And this article talks about how Street Fighter 4 and pretty much every other fighting game, it's almost a different game whether you're playing it locally or on the network. And that's basically unacceptable. Frankly, you've got to make local play, you've got to make that bad to match online play, and online play has to be good enough. You don't want to have these two completely different modes where you're playing differently. You can actually impose some lag on single player, but that's only going to work if you've actually got a system and you've worked out the version of a fighting game that works with lag, that works online.
Yeah.
Like, I think about all the different kinds of first-person shooters there are, and when they came out, and what sort of kind of lag you had around then, what you could expect, and how that ecosystem really kind of decided what game modes in an FPS worked better, what weapon types, what movement speed. As networks got better, lag got better, bandwidth improved, you were able to have more and more different kind of things that didn't work back in the mid-90s. I'm sure you see what I'm saying. So maybe Street Fighter V, by really going for it properly, is going to work out eventually what the right thing to do is. Maybe that's going to be Street Fighter 6. I'm really actually happy to hear that Street Fighter 4 cut a lot of the fat off fighting games and Street Fighter 5 has gone even further.
Yeah.
This feels to me like I'm reading an article that's about a Blizzard game in terms of really being willing to get rid of all of the stuff that the pros probably were really upset about because they thought they really liked it. So I've got a lot of optimism for this stuff, but it's actually kind of secretly one of the most interesting launches in a year.
Oh, it really, really is. This combination of things is kind of quite bare bones thing. And the stuff you're alluding to there is the simplification of stuff like meters. I mean, certain games went really over the top with that. The meter system in Street Fighter 4 is actually relatively comprehensible compared to Marvel vs. Capcom, obviously, but also some other of those games. And this thing, the way it's described here, it sounds okay to me. The stuff that he's talking about here also about things like option selects and buffering moves and so on being easier to do. That sounds interesting, but it does make me a bit concerned that you'll get the Smash effect where so much is easy to do that the actual tech that gets discovered is really crazily hard to do. And if there's any important tech that gets found early on that everyone, inverted commas, has to learn, that's very frustrating for a casual player because it completely defeats the object of simplifying this stuff at a low end.
That's really an excellent point. I hadn't thought about that at all. That even if your stated goal is to make what I would call the micro, maybe you're saying that tech is the right term for that. The button presses, but I liken it very much to micro in StarCraft or in League of Legends. If your stated goal is to make that much less important, even if that's your goal, you may not achieve it. And I mean, what you just said, it really interests me. I think that's absolutely right. You're going to be so hard to stop in a game like this. People finding stuff on the fringes. But we should talk though about whether it's the right move to go away from micro in general. I mean, I think we've talked about an indie fighting game in the past that talks a lot about doing this, and it reminds me exactly of card games, of Hearthstone and Magic, because so many people say that their problem with Magic is that it's actually just really hard to play. The micro of working out when to play a card, working out the right series of cards to play is so hard that it's this real barrier. But, I mean, that's just what games are, what high-level competitive games are. There's always going to be a barrier, and it's really up to the developer to choose where it is.
Yeah, and also what kind of thing it is. I mean, with a fighting game, there is no way you're ever going to get away from that time commitment, the muscle memory, and also the knowledge commitment of needing to understand the metagame. I mean, people who describe Street Fighter as, advanced rock, paper, scissors, it kind of really is that at a high level. We're going to talk about that a little bit in the next topic as well. But yeah, it defining exactly which skills you want people to have and how hard those are to acquire, it's something that you can't always necessarily do consciously. I mean, as I said, looking at these kind of changes, when I started to learn a tiny bit of Street Fighter 4, friend of the company and show, Alex Darby, taught me a little bit about how to play Street Fighter properly. And I find that really interesting. So if this is getting rid of some of the annoying parts of that early learning process, then I feel like I'm going to be attracted to it. And I don't mind having to learn some really obscure glitch or whatever eventually to play one of these games. I mean, I am happy to use some of that stuff when I play Smash. So it might just be okay.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of these companies are trying to lower the floor. They're trying to lower the entry point for being at the top level.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that's the right call. Again, the mid-level of these things tends to be absolutely terrible. After the fun of first learning and before you get good enough to really compete, it can be really annoying because you're not going to win anything, and it's just it's disorienting and quite boring. And it seems to be that the approach is to try and lower the time you spend in that middle section. But that is just denying the reality of anything super high level competitive.
Yeah.
The top people are always going to find a way to make the game hard enough that there are only going to be 20 people at that top level. So I think people should maybe just stop focusing on that element of the game design.
Yeah, I mean, what I still want to see is something that really foregrounds the interesting decision making. And I still, as I've said many times, I still feel that needs to be turn-based. I think you have to take out everything to do with the real-time action control if you want to expose that decision making. And then, of course, you end up with a system where Either the glitches are really crazy, or it all becomes about extremely anal high-level metagame stuff. That's the compromise you have to make there. I still want to see that, but that's what's going to happen if someone does it.
Yeah, I mean, we can, trying to find successful pro games that are turn-based is going to be hard.
Yep.
I mean, I think about a lot of real-life sports, and the decision-making is one of the most interesting aspects, but it's still very hard to access. Every so often you'll get a commentator who's good enough. He can say, well, this guy was thinking this, and that's why he tried to do that. That's really tough. I agree with you that the decision-making is kind of the best meta thing about these games, because then you're really criticizing someone's proper play and being like, well, he thought he could do that, and that's really exciting. But I think most spectator sports actually have that problem.
Yeah.
And there are other aspects of them as spectator sports have to be good enough as well.
Also, there's the secret knowledge factor. So the fact that it's hard to understand the decision making is one of the reasons it's so attractive. If you watch a sport and you don't understand what the commentator's saying at all, that's intriguing, and you want to learn what they are saying, and you want to explore it more. So I don't deny that sort of there is that aspect to it as well, the opaque factor.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Street Fighter V. This is exciting.
Also in Street Fighter news, rapper Lupe Fiasco beat fighting game legend Daigo Umehara in a show match. Now, Daigo's sandbagging in this match was so good that some people are still earnestly claiming that this was a genuine victory. I mean, I think it's now fairly clear that he was definitely sandbagging. One of my favorite things about this is there is a conspiracy theory that Daigo didn't know how many rounds were in the match, and he was planning on making a sterling comeback in the final 2 rounds and then failed because he ran out of time. Anyway, is there something unique about esports that makes it possible to create genuine ambiguity around such things?
I have to say I don't think so. I think the only thing that's really allowing this to be somewhat ambiguous is just the length of a Street Fighter round. To the uninitiated, it kind of feels like you might be able to get a lucky win because they're so short, and obviously the moves can do quite a lot of damage. You can, if you really don't know what's going on, you could kind of say, oh, that's a bit random. In poker, you can lose a couple of poker hands if you're the best player in the world playing the worst player in the world. There's just nothing you can do about that. So I think it's around the game design more than it is around it being an esport rather than an actual sport.
Sure, I guess poker is the best example there. I mean, I was trying to think about, like, if this was a one-on-one basketball contest, then it would be really obvious if the pro was sandbagging.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just don't know. The thing that surprises me here, and I don't understand Street Fighter to have any really good handle on this, is it might be ambiguous whether or not this Diego person was playing up to his standard, but was Lupe Fiasco not obviously playing terribly?
No, I think generally his play is considered to be reasonable.
Right. Okay. I mean, as someone, a 300 ranked tennis player can beat a top tennis player under certain circumstances. I don't know if that's a good analogy here. I'm sure. Sorry, I think it's clear that this guy was not trying. At the very least, was not trying. And I saw someone saying that it was a show match, as in tennis. People often throw the first couple of sets so it goes the distance, and then play properly in the final set. And then that kind of supports what you were saying. I don't know what else to say about it really. I mean, I'm sure that if it mattered to him, he would have won. For me, it's about how good the rapper is rather than how good the pro is.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, because there has been some debate of if Lupe entered EVO, where would he come? That's actually been up for debate. I really like this. I really like the way they've set this up, the kind of the news story aspect of it. I feel like the reason that I asked a question about whether this is a unique kind of ambiguity is that people haven't been able to particularly well define exactly what it is about Daigo's play that makes it obvious he's sandbagging here. You can point to some specific instances in the match, for example, where he misses dragon punches, and at that level you wouldn't do that. There are some instances where he gets caught by weird responses, but he shouldn't have been caught by it. But, you know, there's always that factor of a sort of incompetent player being able to fool a top pro by doing things that you shouldn't do. And so that's really interesting. It's sort of, for me, bound up with the particular obscurity of fighting games that people are having to break this down to individual moves.
If you want to throw a tennis match, you can do that in a lot of very, very different ways.
Yeah.
There are a couple of guys I play against at my club. I'm reasonably good at tennis. And I beat them regularly because I target every single shot at their backhand. And if I didn't do that, they would win. And that's not something that would be easy to tell if you were just looking at a single show match. You didn't understand the history.
Yeah.
If all I was doing was literally just changing my tactics of where I was hitting the ball, not trying to miss anything, still trying to hit great shots, still trying to win, but not doing the top level strategic thing that I know I have to do to win. That's really impossible to work out. You know, so again, I don't know enough about Street Fighter, but for the games that I do know about, the better you are, the easier it is to lose convincingly.
One of the funny things about this as well is that the community has been sort of deliberately like opaque about it. There's a lot of meta trolling around just saying how good Lupe is and what an upset this was. There's a lot of people sort of doing fake analysis of why his mind games were so advanced that they defeated Daigo. One thing I found really annoying is that there is a really good YouTube channel that does analysis of matches that someone linked me to today, and he plays the matches in slow motion and then puts comments in. And he started to do this match and then just put up a screen saying, "Oh, you didn't really think I was going to do that, did you?" And then there was a comment that said, "Why didn't you analyze Daigo's sandbagging?" And the guy responded with, "Oh yeah, that would have been really interesting. I wish I'd done that." So the community is kind of being slightly self-defeating, I think, by not quite making the most of this.
You know, again, to do better analysis into this, I'd like to know the factor, the dominance factor of Street Fighter. We've definitely talked about this in the past. How many times are you going to beat someone that you're X percentage better than out of 10? There are games where someone who is a certain amount better will win all of the matches, and there are games where they only win sort of 65% of the matches when they're a certain level above someone else. And I'd need to know that about Street Fighter before I could start to, say anything else about this. I do think the one thing that I find puzzling about this is, the ego required to be at the top of any sport is so high. It tends not to be the guys at the very top who won't ever be willing to throw a match.
Right.
I really like this explanation that he screwed up not throwing the match, but it's still a bit of a kind of a sort of Occam's razor kind of thing there, and it's still a little bit of a narrative being pushed onto it. Most guys at the top of their sport would not consider throwing a match, even as a PR stunt.
That's a brilliant point. That's the thing that really struck me about this. When I saw the headline, I did like a massive double take and thought something has gone wrong. Like maybe Daigo's stick broke or something. It would have had to be something really crazy. But it seemed like he was just trolling and he did it for fun. But I agree with you. Like, there's very few instances where someone who is, he is a real, genuine legend of esports. Very few people have reached his level. And also, in terms of the dominance factor, the top 10, sort of top 5 in Street Fighter tends to be very consistent, for one thing. So there really are people who are definite tiers above them. You do get upsets in tournaments where a weird player gets through, but it's been very rare, I think. Someone who knows the community well can tell us this properly, but I haven't seen a lot of examples of weird upsets in the tournaments that I've watched. So, again, I don't feel like it's very likely at all that Lupe came in and surprised him with these elite multi-level meta mind games. I think he did throw it, but that's interesting in itself.
Bing!
Roguelike expert John Harris has a very extensive piece on Kotaku about F. Coughlin Zelda Randomizer, a program which generates a new Zelda quest from an unmodified ROM. He discusses difficulty and randomness in the original game, as well as outlining how the randomizer can make players feel as if they're experiencing it for the first time. Do you think the original Zelda was ahead of its time?
I think it's ahead of its time. It's almost by definition a game that really creates a genre, you can probably say is ahead of its time. One of the reasons that this is sort of possible with Zelda 1 is because it's sort of relatively screen-based for the dungeons. Like, Zelda on the SNES, Zelda on the Game Boy, any of the modern Zeldas have much more complicated interlocking dungeons, and just randomizing the order of rooms that you come across in them would break it completely, but that doesn't happen in the original Zeldas. This reminds me a lot about the incredibly pretentiously named Chess 2.0, which probably the only interesting thing it does is randomize the starting positions of your back line,
Right.
To get rid of standard openings, which I think is great, a really cool idea. And that's kind of gives you a basic idea of what actually is going on here. This is just about creating a certain kind of speed run situation, which is why we're talking about it here, because we talked about this at length last week, and this is a really interesting aspect of that, because if you want to talk about speedrunning as being a thing that's using skill at the game in sort of a wider sense and not just memorization, this is the kind of thing you need to do. This is somewhere in the middle of playing like an actual roguelike and playing something that you can just basically record the input for and do a speedrun like that in your brain. And I thought it was interesting. Again, speedrunning is taking over everything, and people explicitly modding a legendary old game to make it better for speedrunning is pretty cool.
That is absolutely brilliant. Yes, I love that aspect of this, that you're kind of creating a more interesting competition out of an old game. But it did make me think, I really like that point that he made, that he said it can make you feel like you're experiencing it for the first time, because a game is so different when you know sort of broadly what you're supposed to be doing. And something that random generation can do is it doesn't make that into, it's not a narrative anymore, it's a problem to be solved. It's not something that you're running through in your head. And this really highlighted some aspects of Zelda that I didn't really realize, because I've tried to play it a few times, I've never really been able to, basically for some of the reasons that he says, just the sort of brutal difficulty of some of it. But things like keys being a resource that you can use across all these different dungeons, and then, there being ways to sort of supplement them if the player runs out. Stuff like that feels very innovative to me. It would have been so easy to make this game with sort of a load of gated, red key in the red door type puzzles. But to make it a resource really kind of puts a lot of faith in the player, I think.
That's true. That's really modern. And that's the kind of design that you might come up with if you were trying to make a game that was specifically different from the modern Zeldas. So I completely agree with that. It's really nice. Bit of a shout out to John Harris, who's a legendary roguelike writer. He wrote the column at Play, at least I hope he did, for, I can't even remember the website now, but it was one of the most insightful pieces on game design about roguelikes that I've ever read. And it was a regular column, and I'm really happy to see him still writing.
Yeah, no, this is really good, and it's nice to have something more contemplative and a longer piece on game design in general. So really good work there. The ever-resourceful Internet Archive has released around 1,000 Windows 3.1 games in a browser-playable format, including the infamous Ski Free. I thought they'd included a full version of Click and Play, but I was deeply saddened to find it was only the installer, which is amazing.
Well.
I did try and install it, but it didn't work. Did this make you nostalgic for the glory days of 3.1, or did you have a different response?
Maybe a little nostalgic. I mean, 3.1, I think the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because Windows 3, or, more specifically 3.1, is really kind of a dead space for games, because you were running Windows 3.1 on DOS, and DOS was the far superior gaming platform. It was kind of like running a Master System on a PlayStation 4. Like, you could always just go and play PlayStation 4 games. So it was, apologies if that analogy is too weird. That's kind of how I view it. I mean, that's why all of the real games, in inverted commas, justifiably so, were on DOS. I mean, I remember there being a game called Rats, which I loved on 3.1, and there was some good shareware stuff. It was all kind of sort of, you'll know what I mean when I say it's kind of App Store level stuff.
Yeah.
It was like almost the App Store of that particular platform. I love Windows 3.1. It was the first programming environment that I was in. Visual Basic 5, I think, for Windows 3.1 was what I was using, I think. And that was great. So I have a lot of nostalgia for it in general, but not really for the games.
Yeah, I felt the same. I looked at this and I thought, well, actually, do I remember any 3.1 games that I really liked? And I was kind of struggling, but one thing that these games have a really unique aesthetic. as you say, they're all quite limited sort of app story things for the most part, Space Invaders clones and what have you. But the way that the graphics are done in these really, I think it's just low number of colors bitmaps. And a lot of it is based on squares. I think Visual Basic was very keen that everything be in a square or a rectangle. So when an explosion happens, like there's an overlapping sort of transparency error square that you see. And I just really like it as an aesthetic. I want to see some indie games go for this look.
Yeah, I agree. It's about time for that. It's kind of amazing how retro it looks when you look at it. And you're right, there's such a feel to it. I don't know if everything was made in Visual Basic. It probably was. But, that was the only tools you had available to you.
Yeah.
It's a lost time, and it's really lost because people just don't even consider it as a gaming platform. They just completely pass over it in their minds.
It also made me think about, this is all running on DOSBox, just what an important thing DOSBox is. When you look at video game sort of conservation efforts, they tend to be a little bit sort of library-esque. They're about kind of getting the boxes of these old games and so on. But DOSBox might be the most important cultural preservation tool for gaming that's ever existed.
Yeah, I guess it's that or MAME, right?
Yeah,
those would be the two having the fight for that title.
Yeah.
DOSBox is pretty great. I don't know how you can disagree with that. Yay, DOSBox.
Yay. Richard Cobbett has a piece on Tech Radar bemoaning a lack of high-quality gaming merchandise. Interesting thing, this. Do you think that the market for game merchandise is not being served?
I don't know, because I'm not really a collector of this kind of stuff myself. I just don't know whether we're nowhere near enough of this stuff, or whether this is just exactly what the market should be doing, and it's pretty niche. I mean, I like the idea of there being a specialist shop that has nice die-cast figures from every single game that came out last year. That would be really awesome. It's not very realistic, though.
Yeah.
I really wanted to just jump on this bandwagon with Richard Cobbett of hating these things called Punko Fops or Pop Funkos. What are they called? Funko Pops.
Yeah. These
horrifically sort of homogenous, mildly anime-ish bobble-headed things that managed to make every single IP that they touched look like the same IP, and is definitely not worthy games merchandise. It's fine if you're a fan of Funko Pops, but it's not like you're suddenly going to be extremely happy that you've got the Portal stuff that you need because they bought out Funko Pop Portal stuff.
Yeah.
So yes.
Yeah, it's interesting to see people get angry about that. It's the dominance of these things that always makes people angry, right? I mean, this Funko Pop thing, it seems like a very efficient way of doing this. Basically sort of blobby vinyl figures that get painted in the right colors for your thing. And I think that, as much as it's fine for a connoisseur to bemoan the mass market, this is kind of proving a point here, which is that this is how it works. It's not worth making these massive bespoke products for every game because they're just not going to sell. There aren't enough people who like that game to buy them. But if you can make one product and reskin it for every game under the sun, and people genuinely like that, I don't think there are people buying these Funko things and just going oh, this is terrible, and I wish I had this other more specific thing. I think people just actually like them. So that really shows what you have to do to make it work, I think.
Yeah, I mean, but a few of the ones that they make are, sort of genuinely in aesthetic for the game. I'm looking at 8 here, and the Big Daddy one from BioShock and the Claptrap one from Borderlands are both basically representative of what those things look like in the games.
Right.
But if there's anything human, it has such a strong personal aesthetic, the Funko Pop, that I think it just sort of really washes out almost anything that comes from the game itself. But that's an aesthetic discussion for a different day. I mean, maybe that is the only thing that can survive. I mean, are we going to have physical models for much longer? I don't know. It's an interesting thing to look at, but I feel like there haven't been enough in the past. I feel like my favorite games don't in general have some weird tat that I can buy on eBay.
Yeah, it's this sort of bridge between the stupidly expensive kind of handcrafted model of whatever and this low-level mass market nonsense. There's nothing in the middle, which I think is what Richard Cobbett's arguing for. Like, I could conceivably buy some kind of perhaps slightly classier thing for a game that I like, but again, I'm like you, I'm not a big merch person. I mean, I know people really like the Pip-Boy. Friend of the show, Alex Malakian Hayes, for example, got very excited about the Pip-Boy that you got with the collector's edition of Fallout, because he likes that kind of thing, and it was quite well put together, and it had the app as well, which did all the stuff. So maybe this middle tier is something that needs to be served a bit more.
Yeah, I really like the idea of the Pip-Boy, but again, what do you do with it once you've stopped wearing it on your arm?
Yeah.
Like, most people don't have, like, a coolly set up room where they can display everything in a really, legitimate way, which is kind of what I would want to do if I was collecting these things. They just kind of end up going into a drawer, or a cupboard, or a box, and then kind of doing absolutely no good there. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'd rather there was a version, like a trading card game based on all video games. Like, I'd rather there was like a collectible football stickers, but for games.
Oh, wow.
That would work for me, because I like buying cards.
Yeah.
And, obviously you could, Valve kind of slightly do that with their funny Steam trading card things.
Yeah.
And that in real life, like, I probably just wouldn't be able to not buy a pack of those anytime I was in a newsagent. If they had, like, a couple from every game, that would be about the most exciting thing in the world to me. So that would work for me.
Well, maybe that's Valve's new project. RPS has a piece about Rocket League's new banning system, which will block players who have deleted content, particularly the controversial Wasteland Arena, which features weird terrain. Is this a fair ban policy?
Right, we have to be a bit clear about this. So, Rocket League has a mechanic by which when they're matchmaking you, they check that you've got the content to play on the map that you're being matchmade to play on. You can understand how this might be important if they have paid DLC in the future, because some people will have that and some people won't. So they've just started releasing non-standard maps, and they're starting to go a bit crazy with this. So some people are just like want none of that nonsense and just delete the local file for this new map, Wasteland, and then never get it on their matchmaking queue, which I kind of definitely sympathize with.
Yeah.
I really wanted to talk about Rocket League bringing in non-standard maps. Like, is this their approach to stopping the game getting stale? How does this work? Does this really not compromise the real purity of Rocket League? What do you think?
I feel like this shouldn't be in the main rotation, because it's going to make such a huge difference to the game. I've not played this map. It doesn't sound like something I would enjoy very much. And it also sounds like the kind of thing that should alienate players. And now what's happened with this ban policy is that they've got into a war with players because they've not given people the choice. And we talk a lot about, what choices should you give people, and splitting the community, the dreaded phrase that
split the community.
That everyone brings up as the absolute mortal sin of multiplayer development. You can't split the community. If they had the option to not have these crazy maps in your map pool, would that split the community?
Well, I think that the key is that imagine you're a game developer. Imagine that crazy scenario.
It's quite hard.
I think what you want is to have a core mode, which is dominantly popular, and then, also offer a bunch of crazier, weird stuff that your fans can play, but that is honestly significantly less popular than your main mode. I honestly think you'd rather a sort of a 90-5-5 system than like a 40-40-20 system or something like that, if you know what I mean. I think that's literally what you would want most as a game designer. So when you are deciding the features you're putting in, you then have to say, well, this is what we want. So now I have to decide whether this is a thing that's going into the main section or a thing that's going into a side section. And therefore you have to make the really tough choice. Like, if you really believe this is the right direction, then you have to shoehorn it in to the main section. And if you don't, then you are basically saying, this thing I got really excited about is only going to be for sort of bonus play. And I think that's probably quite hard to come to terms with.
Yeah. What struck me about this was the sort of totalitarianism of these modern multiplayer systems where the developers decide, what is the main mode, and they decide what is an option. Whereas back in old server browser land, it was completely, I guess, sort of communist. It was the furthest away from that
I wouldn't say it's
be.
necessarily not like that. I mean, you can obviously choose which... you can broadly choose which mode you want to play. And it's the developer's job to sort of, make those minor or major, I guess. But my point was mainly just that, in terms of what you would wish for as a developer, that's what you would wish for.
Right, but what I'm saying is that you can't vote against this. Like there isn't a mode where you can't have this arena.
Right.
So it's entirely out of your hands. Whereas before, you would just choose never to play on a server running that map.
Right, this reminds me of the old Katabatic in Tribes 2 that was such a popular map, it was played on almost all of the servers. So actually it kind of, I guess that was a democratic position. But, that was one of those things where it would have been better if the developers had taken a slightly stronger arm.
Yeah.
Because it was probably, people liked it in the short term because they always got to play the map they liked, but they got bored of the game quicker and it was bad for the game in the medium term. So, as long as the developers are doing the right thing, you probably want them to have, the power to make the right decisions for the game going forward. But this is turning into a pretty proto-political discussion now.
Yeah. I mean, this is sort of exactly what I'm saying. Like, if you're forcing people to play this thing and they don't like it, that's bad for the game. But exactly as you said, one of the reasons that I'm not playing Rocket League as much now is it does get quite samey, and it gets to the point where, you have to start ramping up that skill level to make it not completely samey, to have different sort of types of things happen in matches. And to be fair, it lasts in that phase longer than almost any other games ever existed before you hit that point, so that's fine. But then, yes, I expect they're feeling the need to try and keep people's attention now.
Yeah, this is such a weird, massive difference between multiplayer and single player. As people get better at making games and games get more advanced and everything, single player games are getting a more and more designed experience. Like, we've talked in the past about how the developers know what you're going to have been able to do by the X hour mark. They can make everything work out well for you. They can give you this feeling of progression even if you're, not progressing in any meaningful way. And that's now so at odds with multiplayer, where we've got this opposite problem where as soon as you realise how bad you are at the game, it stops being fun, which is basically what happens when you're trying to get past that middle tier I was talking about earlier. And you're looking at two massively different experiences. So that's probably going to cause some issues going forward. Because, again, I've also stopped playing Rocket League. If Rocket League had this amazing single player, and to be clear, for me, that probably means really weird kind of proto bot match thing. I know that it's got bot matches, but if it had something that was good enough for me to play, I probably would be still playing it. But I don't want to go back online and be confronted again with the fact that I know I'm never going to be good enough to level up, so there's no point in me playing it anymore.
Yeah, and also I'm starting to wonder if this drive towards an esport as the ultimate goal is actually good for game design, because that really implies that you need to make a game that's playable at an extremely hardcore level, and it needs a lot of depth. Whereas if you look at multiplayer games on mobile, they're going the opposite way. They're trying to eliminate all skill to the point of nonsense, where the only thing that really matters is sort of time and money. So I wonder about the middle tier of multiplayer games that are just fun.
Yeah, oh no, the middle's getting crushed. I mean, I agree. On a slightly sort of tangential point to that, I still think that trying to make an esport is a terrible idea. Unless you're Blizzard and you can do it and it doesn't matter if it fails, and combined with the fact that you're much more likely to not fail, I think that you're still most likely to be left with nothing. A game that didn't make you enough money and actually wasn't liked by almost anyone at all if you go for that, rather than, again, trying to make some more traditional fun into it and not spending your entire time worrying about whether it can work as an esport if it gets popular enough. I know that's a slightly different point. I mean, it's funny though that you would level that criticism in a conversation about Rocket League, which a lot of people would say is sort of one of the most simply fun games there's been for ages. But I don't find myself disagreeing with you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree, but it's decisions sort of like this one that, what are they trying to push the game towards? I mean, it would be bad if they sort of made it a lot more skill based or whatever to sort of enhance the pro game, and I don't see them doing that. But I also do see a lot of developers, as you say, talking about trying to intentionally make an esport. I mean, I kind of feel like that's a bit like trying intentionally to have a number one record, which is that you should only do that if you have a really high intimate knowledge level of exactly what it takes to make a number one record, and you've probably had one already in your career.
Yeah, there are basically only like 10 artists for whom that's a good idea.
Right, yeah.
Just to step immediately out of my comfort zone. But I've been hearing a lot about Kanye West and Beyonce recently, who have had like massively different but both very successful big launches in the last few weeks. And the honest truth is that if you're Beyonce, then your entire system knows how to make a number one hit, and everything should go into doing that.
Yeah.
But if you're not, you should be trying to make authentic music people like. But I mean, I better stop talking about music before you hang up on me.
Well, I mean, this trend in music is actually so interesting because it's the sort of, it's the amount of weirdness and edginess that is acceptable within the palatable framework that really works for both those artists that you mentioned. I mean, the content and some of the production in Beyonce's new song is quite controversial and unusual and quite aggressive. And obviously Kanye West is a one-man universal circus. So it's so interesting, this difficulty of trying to maintain your awareness of what a mass market thing is while still being edgy enough to do it. And that's why, I just agree with you. Like, for almost any developer, you should not try and make an esport. Just try and make a good game that people like playing a lot in multiplayer, and then support the esports stuff if it starts to emerge. I think that's the best
And if you want to make it more likely your game is just a plain success in multiplayer, you have to have a great single player. Like, for me, it still comes back to, if you want to be safest, you need to have a great single player, because if multiplayer doesn't work, you've still made a great single player game. Multiplayer is much more likely to work because you've got a lot more people who are willing to play multiplayer because they played single player and liked it a lot. So it's kind of like, this is such a low percentage hit driven business that you should be doing the things that make it more likely that you'll succeed. Boom.
We move on. According to Eurogamer, country music star Shooter Jennings, astonishingly, this is a real person, will debut his new album Countach inside Shroud of the Avatar. Ian Hardingham, is this more or less stupid than U2's 2008 concert inside Second Life?
This is definitely more stupid. Doing a concert in Second Life was probably seen as a reasonably mainstream thing to do back then, actually, because a lot of big companies and big brands were experimenting with it. You could buy Nike shoes in Second Life. IBM were live streaming tennis match data into Second Life. No one's doing that in Shroud of the Avatar, let me promise you. Shroud of the Avatar's also really weird. I mean, I was going to talk about how this shows how old I am, that I don't even understand this. But I do understand this. And I'm the only person old enough to appreciate how ridiculous putting this in the next Ultima game is. And what does Countach mean? Am I even pronouncing it correctly? I don't know.
I'm not sure about Countach. One thing I do like is the album art for this album.
I love the album art.
It says For Giorgio, which I presume, it's got this kind of Italo disco, like purple and kind of neon look to it. It's got something that looks like the weird monster from Neverending Story. It's got a panther wearing sunglasses with a lady on top and a plane. It's really good. It says featuring Marilyn Manson.
Exactly something that you would see within the weird Far Cry 3 Expandalone.
Yes.
Whose name I'm forgetting, but the future Bizarro action film thing.
Dragon.
Something Dragon.
Dragon. Far Cry Laser Dragon.
Yeah, Laser Panther Dragon.
What's that called? That thing. Yeah, it does. It's the same color palette. Well, I mean, I guess on the plus side of this, this album was never going to get mentioned in the games press unless he did that, right? And Richard Garriott is singing on it as well. So
yeah, I think this is a cool thing to do. having not heard his music, I don't know if I think Shadow of the Avatar is the right one, but this is country music, so it might be. I just love the fact that, as part of this promotion, he's giving away an in-game item that is the track that you can go and play on an in-game record player.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool. I mean, again, I'm not sure Shadow of the Avatar is cool enough to pull that off, but
I'm starting to like this more. Like, I think this is so weird. I mean, I'm looking at Shooter Jennings. He's got 264,000 fans on Facebook.
Oh, that's not
So
bad.
he's obviously a player, within the country music scene. He's got this thing going on with Marilyn Manson, who's of course
His
very
fans
famous.
are annoyed that you have to pay £30 to turn up to this special event.
Yeah.
Don't most events involving musicians cost £30 at least?
Yeah, I think so. People seem quite angry in general, and they're asking why it's got the thing for the never-ending story on it. So, I mean, if they're confused by that, then this I like this. He's sowing the seeds of confusion, and that's what an artist should do.
Can we release our game in an
Shadow of the
album?
Avatar.
Like, can we do the opposite? Because I'd like to get covered on the music press and get like a load of angry tweets from country music fans who think my games are bullshit.
Definitely. Let's do that. That's the end of that. Now, Fraser Brown on PC Games Then has written about his desire for better side quests in RPGs. Do you think that the pressure to have huge numbers of quests over the last few years has reduced their overall quality?
Yeah, well, there's such a pressure here between wanting to live in a Bethesda world and have like a literally unlimited number of quests, because the whole desire is as a feeling of being utterly immersed that you could like live your whole life in this world. There's such a massive difference between that and a game which is about going through a narrative properly. And the second one, probably shouldn't have a load of really boring side quests. And Bethesda are like boring side quest land. So, I mean, I just think that there are two different things. I've got more and more alienated by RPGs in general in the last couple of years. And certainly, side quests are okay, but actually they're kind of... I feel like the open world RPG is the genre that most needs to be badly disrupted.
Yes.
And this is like just one of the many symptomatic issues with it as a genre.
Oh, I completely agree with that, because I was thinking about this, and actually, I kind of hate both things that he's talking about here.
Exactly.
Like, I hate the random, pick up 5 pelts, and I also hate the really contrived... I watched someone's Fallout 4 stream, and they did this story where it was this weird town, and they all made this reference to like this place that no one's ever supposed to go, and then he hacked someone's computer and he went there, and it was a bunker, and there were some weird people, and I just thought, how many times, like, that was cool like 15 years ago. That was really cool. That's what everyone talked about. And now it's just gets trotted out. Every side quest has to have this sort of very kind of predictable twist to it, or whatever, and I just those stories are over. We need different things.
Yeah, we need to get out of this dungeon. Like, we need to be in a completely different kind of dungeon. And it may seem weird, but actually some of the stuff that I'm doing in Frozen Synapse 2 is somewhat related to this. One of the big problems with these open world RPGs is how static everything is.
Yeah.
So a random quest based in a completely static environment is basically really just useless, because, I'm going to go to this location and maybe there's a big boar there and maybe there's not, and that kind of thing, and it's not working for me anymore, games industry.
Yeah, you have this whole thing of this world that's crafted around you, but yet feels, as you say, inert and monolithic, and nothing you do actually matters or changes anything. So then it's all down to appreciating the individual stories. And also, because of this problem, this need to have loads and loads of quests, the individual stories can often be quite poor, predictable, underwritten stories. So you're kind of left with the worst of all worlds. I absolutely agree with you. I want to see a big company with a big budget come in and go, what is the next thing in this genre? Time to do some genre innovation here and really blow all of the other open world games out of the water.
Yeah, and we're actually gonna be further away from that, because Fallout 4 did so well.
Yeah.
Fallout 4 did much better than they were expecting. And Fallout 4, I'm sorry, once you actually get to know what it is, it's a really boring, turgid thing.
Yeah.
And we're just going to see more and more of it. So, maybe it's down to indies to sort this out. Although, this is one of the hardest genres to do as an indie because of how, the sheer volume of content you tend to need. I mean, I guess roguelikes are trying to get there. Dwarf Fortress and Ultima Regem Regit are coming from a completely different direction of having something fully formed, but from sort of constituent parts that don't cost anything. But I think it just needs to be sorted out.
When Skyrim came out, I felt like I had to buy it because the experiences that I was going to have in that game were going to be really unique. It was going to move on from Oblivion, which I liked, but I never completely got on with. I felt like it was absolutely essential. And when Fallout 4 came out, I started to have that feeling, and then I looked at reviews and I looked at what it actually was, and I thought, no, I don't want to do this again. I'm not interested in this. And that's so different. That's not just a factor of aging. It's a factor of this stuff being known. I know all of the things that can happen to me in this type of game now, and I don't want them to happen anymore. I'm not that interested in them. So I really feel like we need something different. I'm still interested to play Metal Gear Solid because I feel like that has some stuff in it that's unique to that's original.
Yeah, it does, and you do have to play it. And one of the great things about it is it's so weird that you don't know what's going on.
Right.
And actually, kind of the more I do this thing of playing these games in my life, the more I realise that chasing the thing that I just don't understand how it's working is one of the most important things.
That's a very very good point. As soon as the systems become obvious, then it really loses that ability to be enigmatic, and it
won't be Bethesda that does it, because there is zero chance that they will innovate 10% of what they need to make this happen. And of course, while they're making this amount of money, they don't have to, but it's just not going to be them, and it's not going to be the Witcher guys either. And it's not going to be Dragon Age guys, it's going to be someone new.
More PC games then now, and Jeremy Peel has an article discussing the ongoing success of Crytek's Warface. It seems that the company has actually managed to create the fabled game as a service with its F2P multiplayer shooter. Apparently, Eastern European audiences are more open to temporary paid unlocks and, quote, arcade-style respawn coins. Don't remember any arcades having them when I was a nipper. Will we see more games like Warface?
There is this is quite late in the podcast to bring up a topic that's going to tax my brain so much. There's quite a lot going on here. So let's start off with the fact that I thought Warface was dead.
Yep.
I was really surprised to read an article. I was just at the pub with Visiting the Village pub correspondent Adam Hunt earlier in the week, and I was just joking with him about Warface. He'd never heard of it, and he looked at me like I'd made up a game name when I said it, and I was like, "Yeah, it was a complete failure. That's why Crytek had to sell their technology to Amazon." Which appears not to be the case.
No.
So what's going on here? So the idea is that, what you'd really like if you were Activision is for everyone to keep playing the same version of Call of Duty. That every single person would buy or upgrade when the next one came out, and blah, blah, blah. And this should be, games as a service. How many times we've heard that one before. I'd really like to see some numbers about how Warface is actually doing, because some of this smells wrong to me. But apparently it is doing well. I don't know.
Something that really struck me about Warface, just reading this article, is how crazy it sounds. Apparently there's this movement stuff where you're sliding around all the time. There's a part where it says the game has only become more eccentric, setting mech battles in serious Sam-style coliseums and going full volcano base. I mean, I barely understand what either of those two things are, but I mean, it sounds like they've got this framework that people are happy to be in and happy to spend their money in, and they're going crazy doing interesting stuff.
Yeah, and again, certainly not denying that a couple of games can make it as games as a service free-to-play FPSs, but it's only going to be a couple.
Yeah.
I don't see the way where the ecosystem can support, 100 ongoing free-to-play FPSs. And that's the whole thing. These things only work when you invest enough money in them on an ongoing basis to keep your users. and the whole thing just basically doesn't happen very often, and it's just not something that you can hope to achieve when you're starting a games company from day one. So it really makes me think it's interesting the way that RPGs, there was a while there where it was fine for MMOs to go from being paid to being free to play. And I mean, it's still kind of okay, but many more of them actually launch free to play nowadays. These things work most often when you get a game that happens to be popular enough, and then you can pivot. And I'm just sort of talking now. I really don't know what to say about Warface. It's cool that it's a bit funny. Like, they obviously are pretty tongue in cheek about it, and the name is pretty tongue in cheek. Am I going to have to play this now?
Possibly. I mean, one of the things that really interested me is this: the fact that it's Russian operator. They have millions of registered users, it says here, and it's most played in Russia and Eastern Europe. And that's something that is something that you've talked about before, which is the accessibility of free-to-play games in territories where people might not necessarily want to spend, the big fee to get in. I've forgotten the name of this game, and I can never remember it, but there is a skill-based competitive free-to-play FPS that dominates all the free-to-play charts and is never talked about by the press. It's called something like Blackout. I think it's enormously popular in Brazil as one of the countries where it's played a lot. And I believe it's mobile as well. I keep forgetting this game's name. But there's stuff like that just happens. And because we're only exposed to sort of the generic kind of much more mainstream press, these things don't get talked about. So I kind of feel like maybe Warface is not such an outlier.
Yeah, sure. That's possible. I feel like I want to check it out. It's so tough to work out how big a game is when it's big in a country you know nothing about.
Yeah.
Like, I can tell you how big games are in England from sort of my Twitter feed and kind of having a vague idea, but I don't know what it means to be big in Korea, and what that means. And these social differences, these kind of territorial differences of people in Eastern Europe and Russia being much happier to accept the vagaries of free to play. That's interesting. Does that mean we're all going to get there eventually and they've just got a head start?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Keith Stewart has some musings on why the Steam controller is emblematic of Valve's business practices. A quote here. At any point in our history, the thing was being the most successful from a business perspective at some point was the thing that made no sense if you looked at it from a pure accounting perspective. I think that sums up quite a lot of Valve's approach. Do you think this ongoing approach is going to pay dividends for them again in the future?
Yeah, important to say that we love Valve here at Mode 7. And I wanted to talk about this mainly from the Steam controller perspective. It is very interesting to hear that that quote you were talking about. They sort of said that if you find success somewhere and then just continue to keep milking that success, you kind of will eventually fail. And I think you could probably write a lot of essays on that topic and whether or not that's kind of true. But I'm glad that they followed that because most of the things they've done is great. This article talks about the Steam controller being a bit of an enigma. And I think that's sort of kind of true. We've got one in the office. I like it quite a lot. It's going to take, quite a big event for me to bring a gaming PC into my living room, which is really the only situation in which I would be using a Steam controller. It's got a problem. It's just competing against the mouse and the PS4 pad for different games, and it's just hard to compete with those two things.
I found the way they pose it so interesting here. They said it's the game controller that needs to support the widest array of different input methods or something similar to that. And that just really made me think, well, isn't that just a really bad idea? But as a concept, the thing that has to support the most possible things is going to be worst at quite a few of those things, when, as you say, there are two very good advantages. I was reading this and I thought, what if Valve came out with like the best lap board ever? The best shaped piece of plastic that means I can put my keyboard and mouse on my lap. Because a lot of people do that. I've played games in the living room like that, and it's fine. Like you just take a little bit of time to get used to it, less time than you take with the Steam controller, and it's fine. I do like the Steam controller. I think it's an interesting and fun thing to use, and I would like to experiment with playing games with it more. But I still feel like it's in this really weird place.
I mean, for me, it's a lot more attractive than a lap board. I understand what you're saying. That it's something that you get used to. But there are a lot of times where there are quite a lot of games that, on the one hand, I'm only willing to play them when I'm chilling out, and I only want to play games that I can sort of be completely laid back holding a controller. And I think that does an admirable job of trying to make the mouse stuff work on the controller. It's not going to beat the mouse, and it reminds me a little bit of in-house streaming or of streaming technology, in that it doesn't really matter how good it gets. If it's even 1% inferior to going upstairs and playing it on a proper computer with a proper mouse, it's just never going to win. Because for whatever reason, that's just not what we want. We don't want even a slightly substandard way of gaming. That just doesn't work for the majority of gamers, I don't think. So, but yeah, I don't want to be down it, because I do actually think it's really good. And what I hope most is that they keep playing with it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that there aren't that many technological advances you'd have to get to make their thumb pads really cool. Like, they use haptic feedback, and I actually think that while that's all right, if there was a technological advance to be made there where there was actually a little bit of actual physical changing of the thumb pad as you did some stuff with it, I think that could like cross the line into being really pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're a long way away from that. So that could be a technology that allows this to really leap the gap.
Yeah, that's the thing I would like most, is that they take this in a direction that is, I would say, distinctive, that this pad can really do stuff that other things can't do, and it's better at those things. And that might be how it works. We've talked about this a lot, the way that companies, bigger, powerful companies will jump into an area in a way that seems a bit out there and doesn't really necessarily make that much sense, but they'll then leverage that in the future into something that does make sense. I mean, Steam itself was exactly that. It was an update system that seemed a bit odd and a little bit kind of, why do I need this? And then that turned into the most important thing in PC gaming ever. So this approach, I feel, generally for them is really interesting, and I'm still interested to see what's going to happen with VR. It really does sound like Vive is vastly superior to Oculus from a technical standpoint, and in a market where the tech people are the people who are going to be deciding early on, that could be critical.
Yep, you're right. We can hardly have a conversation about gaming hardware without it being massively overshadowed by VR. And yeah, it is a bit of a frustrating time right now, because we're still not there, and we still don't know if we're going to be there soon or not soon. So, yeah, so we just have to see if the Vive is what it is. And I just don't know how long it's going to take for us to work out the new boundaries, if that's even relevant, blah.
Yeah. I really like the Vive as a competitor to Oculus. I really like them going, we're going to make something that's a bit more inconvenient, but is a lot better. That, to me, is a really interesting play. And so I think it's very healthy for VR, and I want to see how it pans out. So yeah, I generally like what Valve do. I think the Steam controller is a very gutsy, bold thing. But as they say in this article, it required them to set up their own manufacturing, which is the stuff you see behind the scenes that can be really useful later on. If you know how to do manufacturing now, then that's going to allow you to do all kinds of things.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, just to get back to that Oculus thing, what exactly have Oculus been doing for the last 2 years? It seems like every year they come out with a new version of the Rift, which is just slightly higher resolution. It just seems like they were moving much too slowly.
Yeah, I know. I don't really... I need to do a really extensive side-by-side comparison of these two things to really have a good opinion on that. But I agree with you, like, there was very little exciting things about Oculus, aside from them claiming to have fixed motion sickness, which I think was an issue for a lot of people. That was a big change. But yeah, beyond that, it's just not exciting anymore technically, whereas I think people are very inspired by the Vive and what the Vive can do. But it's such early days. I mean, it could really go either way, or it could go nowhere, and we're still waiting to see, as you say.
Yeah, we're waiting.
Ding.
Get on with it, VR.
That's enough of that, and now it's time to take a step back in time for our regular feature where we look at games that were released this week in 2006, thanks to Eurogamer. No producer Jimmy this week, so I compiled the list myself, so I'm sure it will go wrong, and I will have written something down incorrectly. Let us begin with Advent Rising on the Xbox and the PC. Do you know anything about this game?
I actually do. I believe this was written by notorious political figure Orson Scott Card.
Really?
I'm almost certain that he did the writing on this game. Mr. Card, I like his books, don't like his political opinions. Yes, that's right.
Yes, Wikipedia says yes.
This is one of the one of the first games to really play around with having a big name writer on it. A thing which doesn't ever seem to have taken off as a concept, really. Having like a big name novel writer doing the writing for your game. It was all right. It wasn't great.
Right, well, there we go. Yes, music by Tommy Tallarico, who's a composer famous for... At one point, he went to E3 and he hired a load of models and people to go with him as his entourage and kind of shower him with compliments the whole time as a way of making himself seem more important so that he could get more bookings for things. And apparently that worked. So well done, Tommy Tallarico, an awesome man. Blood Rain 2 on the PC, Xbox, and PlayStation 2. Now, the only thing I know about this is that Uwe Boll optioned it. But that's about it.
Yeah, you know what? I think Uwe Boll might have actually made a Blood Rain film.
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's
I'm
true.
not sure he just optioned it. I think he actually made it. Not that I've seen it.
Yes.
Yeah, Blood Rain. I don't know much about it, but it was kind of a thing back then.
It didn't. Yeah, it was a thing, but all the reviews on this don't seem to be very positive. So I'm not quite sure why that happened. Maybe it had some stylistic thing that people liked. Command and Conquer: The First Decade on PC. Now that's a very impressive title for your compilation pack there. I'm just sort of looking to see what you got in Command and Conquer: The First. Wow, you got a lot of things. You got Command and Conquer, Covert Ops, which was a great expansion pack. Command and Conquer Red Alert Counter-Strike, Aftermath, Tiberian Sun, Red Alert 2, Renegade, Generals, expansion pack for that, and Soul Survivor. Apparently. Oh no, it wasn't included with the First Decade. That is a pretty good package of things.
Soul Survivor, one of my favourite sort of weird pivot tangential games. Because it looked exactly like CNC1, well, Red Alert 1.
Yeah.
But it was this weird MMO thing. Yeah, this is cool. I've got like a thing that's a bit like this. I think it was the compilation that came out the year before this. It wasn't called CNC the first 9 years. Should have been.
They should do one every year.
Exactly.
Frogger Helmet Chaos on the DS and PSP.
In any other week, Mr. Paul Cunliffe Taylor, this would definitely be the funniest game name. But without spoiling the rest of this list, this week it is not. Now,
I don't know a lot about helmets, but I think what you want from a helmet is reliability, not
stability.
Entropy. Right, you don't want an entropic helmet. So I'm sure that greatly undermines
Let's make
the game.
Pac-Man helmet stability.
Guilty Gear Isoka. Now, the Guilty Gear franchise spans many, many, many years and games, and is something that we both know almost nothing about. Again, this is a 2D fighting game. It didn't get great reviews. It looks pretty colourful. It looks like a Guilty Gear game. Guilty Gear XRD, still popular at the moment. That's about the sum total of my knowledge.
Yes, who is this Gear? Why are they so guilty? Yeah, it is a fighting game, isn't it? Yeah, it is, right. You said it all, really.
Ico on the PS2. Pretty seminal game.
Yeah, sorry, just so we're clear, this is Ico re-release to coincide with the release of Shadow of the Colossus.
Yes, absolutely. I have a lot of respect for Ico, the way people talk about it, the music. I watched someone play it. It was good, but I've never played it myself.
I played it. It was remastered on PS3 or PS4. I can't remember which. I played it on that, and it was great.
Lunar Genesis on the DS, aka Lunar Dragon Song. 3 out of 5 Metacritic, which is not good. And this looks like a kind of your bog standard DS RPG to me.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember if this is one of the games that had the light sensor.
Oh, yes.
But I do not believe it was one of those games.
Well, you would think, yes, with a name like that. And now, probably the highlight of this week. It's Mark Echo's Getting Up, Contents Under Pressure on the Xbox and PlayStation 2. Now, we remember this coming out. This is one of the most baffling things, that this got to this point with Mark Echo, the fashion designer, and it was all about sort of doing cool street things, like graffitiing stuff. And stuff that people on the street don't really do. But, yeah.
Do you remember when we first did a podcast?
Yes.
Because I'm well, no, but do you? Because I'm trying what year it was.
I think it was 2009, actually.
Oh, okay,
I
so
may
it
be
was
wrong.
significantly after this. All right. I abortively started a weird blog called I can't remember what it was called, and I wrote something to the effect that Mark Echo's Getting Up Contents Under Pressure was a fairy tale story of games.
Right.
Amazing name, ridiculous situation. Yes.
Yeah, probably not one to pick up on re-release. Shadow of the Colossus on the PlayStation 2. I mean,
Amazing seminal game. Absolutely love it.
nothing more to be said about that. Shaman King Master of Spirits 2 on the GBA. I still like these plucky little GBA releases that come out in these weeks. People
I'll be sad when we get to the point where we're 10 years after the death of the GBA.
Yeah, absolutely. This looks like a kind of terrible yet colourful game. There we go. SpongeBob SquarePants and Friends Unite on the GameCube, DS, and GBA. It seems like there's a SpongeBob game every week.
It really does.
Star Wars Empire at War, one of the many, many, many Star Wars games that I didn't play.
This an RTS, I believe.
A very popular RTS, in fact. And it looks like people on Steam really like it, which is interesting for such an ancient game. But it does look pretty cool. The gold pack on Steam. The top review says Mass Gungan Genocide's a possible 10 out of 10. So there you are. Stubbs the Zombie in Rebel Without a Pulse on the PC. That name really irritated me very consistently. whenever I
Everything
saw
about
it.
this property irritated me.
I mean, it's a third-person action game where you play a zombie. Doesn't sound very, very interesting, does it? Super Monkey Ball Touch and Roll on the DS. You're a Monkey Ball aficionado.
Yeah, but I mean, really, without being too hipster, there was only one good Super Monkey Ball, and all of the other ones were not good.
Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Lockdown on the PC. Not a great contribution to the Rainbow Six franchise, I believe.
No, I'm not akin to this one. I'm not aware of this one.
And finally, we have War World Tactical Combat on the PC, which just looks like a sort of third-person action-y robot game. Well, an interesting week there. Shadow of the Colossus definitely the highlight, but we can't forget Mark Echo's Getting Up Contents Under Pressure. And now, as is our custom, we catapult ourselves forward to the present day, and we take a look at the top 10 UK Steam games. And at number 10, it's Hitman on pre-order. I've been hearing a lot of hype about this Hitman game, man. I've been hearing a lot of noises. Yeah, people in the beta, they say it's like Blood Money. They
That's
say
good.
it's episodic, but that it's good that it's episodic because each sort of area is really exciting. And
I'll believe it when I see it, honestly. I hear that
Yeah.
kind of nonsense around a lot of sort of games that are released, and I play them, and they're just what I was expecting to start with, like a quadruple A, reasonably boring, too linear thing for me. But maybe this will break the mold.
Well, the last one, Absolution, that went a bit, I'm going to say a bit Human Revolution, a bit too sort of AAA. And this is much more freeform, people are saying, do more stuff, back to the old
we'll
days.
see. It probably means you're freeform to get involved in more QTEs. Sorry to be cynical, but I'm not.
Number
I'm not
9,
buying it.
Grand Theft Auto. Number 8, Street Fighter 5. Number 7, Counter-Strike Go. Number 6, XCOM 2. Number 5, Danganronpa. 20% off. This is the sort of visual novel game where you have to do things to schoolgirls, and there's a bear, an anime bear that looks all scary.
Okay.
And it was on the Vita, and people really liked it. And it's supposed to be like a good and serious game, despite the silly presentation. I don't know. Number 4 is Plague Inc. Evolved at 10% off. This game will not ever go away. It's just one of the biggest indie success stories ever. It's still not talked about very much. There you go. Number 3 is Fallout 4 Season Pass. Number 2 is City Skylines Snowfall, another game that won't ever go away. And number 1 is Tom Clancy's The Division. It's quite a controversial game that I'm be interested to play at some point. So an interesting top 10 there. A mix of things after the most boring mainstream top 10 ever last time.
Yeah, well done. I was reading that the Fallout 4 Season Pass is pretty expensive.
Yes,
Um,
yeah.
And because they're so pleased with the success it's had, they're doing some really big DLC for it.
Well, there you go. A boon for Fallout fans. That's the end of that, and now we saunter gently into the television and film lounge area where we discuss other forms of media other than games. And today you have picked out for us to discuss the fact that Bill Simmons, the creator of Grantland and also the inimitable Bill Simmons podcast, is starting a new site called The Ringer.
Yeah. Ginormous Bill Simmons fan, ginormous Grantland fan, was so upset when it closed. It just was like what I would read while eating all day, every day. I'm so glad he's making a website. He'll have a lot more freedom. HBO have a lot of money that they will give him. One thing I'm more interested about this, I think The Ringer is a really good name. He wants to harken back to a lot of different things. I'm not trying to go into the history behind this, but I am slightly interested. ESPN did not let him name Grantland what he wanted to name Grantland. ESPN basically sort of came up with the name Grantland after they'd failed to agree on one with Bill Simmons. I'm wondering if The Ringer was what he originally wanted to call that, or if it's a new name.
Whenever I see The Ringer, I just think of that Johnny Knoxville movie where he pretends to be a disabled athlete. Which is called the same thing. That's my primary association with that. And also, it's kind of a negative term. It's a weird thing to call a website.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm kind of, my connection with the Bill Simmons IP sort of manages to find a sort of positive spin on all of that. Like, so it works for me, what can I say? But it is interesting to hear about that. I just wonder... I know it's kind of a really weird Bill Simmons fanboy question, but is this what he always wanted to call his website? Or
I can't believe that the corporate handed down name was Grantland.
Yeah, Grantland was the name of supposedly the first ever sports writer in America.
Yeah.
And they decided that was sort of edgy enough for this. Yeah, I don't know.
This really sums up what I hate about this stuff. To me, there's this kind of meta, sub-intellectual, smug wordplay involved with everything, and that's basically summed up my problem with Grantland. So it seems fitting to me that this new name would continue some of that.
Yeah, it's semiotics, right? That's kind of the term for that.
just all semiotics.
No. I know you're not a fan in general. I know that you're not a fan of kind of. Sort of subconscious sort of received cultural emotions attached to a word. We've actually talked about that kind of stuff in the past, but this is one of the ways in which we differ, because you are not really a Grantland fan, and I'm a gigantic Grantland fan.
I mean, I've enjoyed a lot of stuff on Grantland, I have to say, but I feel like it's stuff that deviates from central Grantland, which seemed to largely be about making kind of very self-important, deliberately obscurantist points about weird aspects of popular culture that are only interesting to a very small group of people. When it deviated from that, it was good, and they definitely had some great writing. I would hope that that tone, the smugness would diminish, and they would focus on more stuff. But the goals with these sites really interest me. I don't know what they think about their traffic and about the kind of stuff that people should be writing on them, or if that's even something they really...
Simmons believes very strongly that Grantland had the ability to be a financial success at ESPN, but they monetized it badly.
Right.
Which, in general, is the kind of thing which sounds like bullshit to me.
Yes.
So you're going to have to go quite far for me to go off that. It doesn't really matter, because he's not paying for any of it. So he's really fine, whatever. But he really believed that it took them the 3 years of Grantland to kind of work out what they were doing.
Yeah.
To get a lot of their SEO, their click-worthiness, their marketing, and their monetization sort of anywhere in the region of success. And that, ESPN just pulled the plug at the wrong time, which is exactly what I'd expect a creator to say, in almost any situation with that kind of thing happening.
Yeah.
But I don't care, because I love it.
I think this is going to be a good thing generally, because any forum, even if you don't like the house style, which I didn't, any forum that allows for that kind of more expansive, exploratory type of writing is good. And yes, it will need time to find an audience and see if it's going to be sustainable. But as you say, it's not his money, so he doesn't care. He can just do what he
I
wants.
think for me, understood the stuff that you don't like about it. Totally cool with that. I think what I like about it is that I like a bit of fantasy in my kind of day-to-day reading. Like, I liked that it was a lot of sort of taking, and this is really Bill Simmons' personal brand, is like a fantasy take on reality, be it sport, fitting a narrative onto a sporting event or on a cultural event or a pop event that is really fun, basically fantastical, but kind of sort of straight-faced is sort of something that really works for me. Because I find the real world a bit boring and like to imagine there are sort of silly things going on in the background, even though there aren't. So I think that's kind of what really worked for me and allowed me to get past, some of the smugness of it.
You like a sort of hard thesis of something that you can explore. And that's what they did. They would have a take on a thing. They would say the best albums that have more than one guest artist on them are these.
Yeah.
And they would just and they would argue as if that was an objective thing that one could argue about. And that was a lot to do with the style. And I understand the appeal of that. I think that can be quite good. But I think they also sort of deliberately pushed it to absurdity to amuse themselves by the end.
Sure. Well, it's just a wonderful thing this is happening. And
Yes.
And I can't wait for it to bloody come out.
Right, enough Grantland / The Ringer. It's on to your listener questions now, and we have a fair few of these on what is already a somewhat epic podcast, but we will proceed with great gumption. And the first question is from Scipio Asheronis, who likes to ask quite in-depth questions. I like these questions. Do you have a previously defined number of sales that counts as a success for you and that you root for when you release a game, or is it more fluid? I would say that we're not as dogmatic about that as some companies. We don't sort of I think we view breaking even on a game that is popular and well received as a significant success. But yeah, obviously we have targets and things that we want to hit and different levels. I think as we've gone along as a company, we've started to get a bit more serious about that and a bit more pragmatic and detailed with our financial planning. But we're not kind of going out to sell 1 million units, really, are we?
I think that, for us, the most important thing is breaking even, and our version of breaking even includes decent salaries to us. So, broadly, if we broke even for the next 20 years, I'd be pretty damn happy about that. It would mean that we got paid a decent salary, everyone else got paid, and we got to do the things that we love, we got to employ amazing people. Breaking even, for me, is not a dirty word. A lot of people have a break-even point that does not include paying them enough or at all. And that's not something I agree with. And also, because we make some residual money from our old games, and our break-even for a game tends to be sort of imagining that sort of doesn't exist, we also kind of have additional from that. So basically, we want to make great games, have a good time doing it, and do it, in a way that pays everyone a reasonable salary. That's kind of the key to what we're doing. Having said that, whenever we make a game, we also hope that it gets so successful that Paul can buy a boat and never have to see me again, and I can buy an island, never have to see Paul again.
Of the two things that you could buy to encourage that, those would be one of the worst. I don't want to buy a boat.
Do you not want to buy a boat?
No, hell no. You shouldn't buy a boat. You should only rent boats. Thoughts on Fig crowdfunding? In crowdfunding investment, it's probably impossible to give full relevant info. Seems quite dangerous. Yeah, I had a look at the Double Fine thing. I respect Double Fine massively. I think of all the things you could do a Fig investment in, actually Psychonauts 2 is pretty good as a prospect. But yeah, doing the kind of due diligence that a real investor would do in that context is actually quite difficult. Like, you want to go and meet the people, you want to see exactly what their plans are, you want to see what they say when their guard is a bit down and so on. So just investing in a company or in a product like that from just a prospectus, it didn't feel good to me. I definitely like the the intangibles, the touchy-feely things about investments are very important to me, particularly in how I relate to the people, I think. The games that I've invested in with Indie Fund, I've been very specific about them, and they had to have something about the project which was very, very specific, and I just don't know if I could get that from Fig.
Yeah, I'm kind of a bit boggled by it. I kind of basically like the idea, like it's basically Kickstarter, but you get a bit of money back if it does well. Like that idea, which maybe that's not what this is meant to be about, but that idea I quite like.
Yeah, I
kind of come to terms with Kickstarter as a way of basically emotionally investing in a game, because in all reality, you've got to know that there's a chance the game won't come out when you kickstart it, or that it'll be bad. And what you're getting for your money really is an emotional investment in it. And to feel like you've helped something that you believe in happen. And there's a lot of sort of touchy-feely stuff going on there. I like the idea that you then get paid back, but actually I kind of think that sort of slightly goes against the whole kickstarting mentality anyway. In terms of basic investment, I just think it's too complicated, and basically agree with what you're saying. I mean, you and me actually kind of try to analytically look at the Double Fine Fig and try and work out, what its real break-even point was, what that mean for you. It's also extremely complicated in terms of how many people invest. I mean, I don't think you should be investing in games through Fig to make money. But if it's to have fun as a kind of weird gambling thing, that's cool.
Right, yeah. And I can imagine that a certain kind of person who really wants to learn that specific system could do well. But yes, generally, probably not the best thing to do. Especially when you consider, just how much worse it is than just private equity investment. If you have a significant amount of money that you're trying to do these high-risk specific investment with, then do angel funding and private equity, because then you get the right to go and march around inside all of the company's documentation and really kind of get the ins and outs of it. Whereas with this, you're just kind of trusting on some numbers that they came out at the end of their spreadsheet. You don't get to see the spreadsheet itself.
Yeah, it still seems predominantly about fun to me. And maybe that's wrong, but that kind of seems the only way in which this makes sense as a kind of fun thing.
Yeah. Another question. Do you think, and this is Scipio Asheronis' hobby horse here, he's back on it. Do you think AAA games in the late 90s, early noughts tech era were a golden age for AAA experimentation and scope, such as Deus Ex, Thief 1 and 2, Morrowind? Was it just a magical time where the best graphics available simply weren't good enough to take up as much of the budget as they do today? And he talks a little bit about how the cost of creating levels at that time was lower, so it enabled more experimentation. I don't really know if that's true. I think these budgets were incredibly hard to get anyway. I think there was a time when publishers were interested in exploring some of the different types of things you could do with a game of this scope. But I don't necessarily think it was sort of... I think it's just got more refined now. They've been able to define what people reliably are able to enjoy more. And when you do that, there's no incentive to be experimental. We talked about this a little bit before. I think that's the driving force here.
The exciting times in game development, the most exciting times will always be when there's a technological advance that allows you to do something you really genuinely weren't able to do before. Yeah. And hopefully also that is a good thing. So the mid-90s was when you could start doing 3D games. I don't think it's about how expensive graphics were. I think those companies still spent a large percentage of their budget on graphics. I think in the last few years, the middle tier, it's been more possible to make money without being massively cutting edge realism on graphics. But this harkens back to what we were saying earlier. It's just exciting when you don't know what the rules are, when the rules are being made up. And that's not going to happen en masse unless it's the result of a big technological breakthrough.
Absolutely. Hoaxfish asks, if computers didn't exist, what would you do instead of make computer games? I think that's pretty easy for me because it's possible to make music without a computer, even electronic music, so I'd probably do that. What about you?
It's an interesting question. This might make you recoil from the computer in horror. But I might write books, only because I think it might have the kind of working style that works for me. Long gestation periods of a product, the ability to be very creative over a long period of time. I could imagine, being pushed down that path and probably then pushing myself into the sea because I didn't make any money.
Well, that's very interesting. You sent me some of your writing once, and I liked it. I thought it was good, and that surprised me. And also, I think that, I mean, you would probably be a sci-fi author, right? Like,
if I were an author, I'd be a sci-fi author. Yeah.
Yeah, and because you're a sort of systemic thinker, that works really well for sci-fi. Some of the best sci-fi is predicated on the author's ability to design an interesting system. So I definitely think I would be interested to see what sci-fi you would write. We should write a book. Our next game is going to be a book.
Well, I have thought in the past that if we ever had to sell one of our properties and we had a no complete clause for a year, I wasn't allowed to make computer games for a year, then I definitely would try and write a science fiction book. So
that's awesome. Well, we should do that. It's a lot easier than games. It's not true. Shabba Dabba Don't says Marmite. Yes or no?
Yes.
I'm going to go with yes. Yeah, we're both fans of Marmite.
Hell yeah.
I'm really surprised you like Marmite.
Love Marmite.
I never know what you're going to say ever.
Good.
Luke Shires says, as an independent developer, how do you approach finding staff and contractors to work with? Back in the day, there used to be some good forums you could go on, look at people's portfolios and so on. Not so easy now. Nowadays, I tend to go for recommendations.
I mean,
just to
be clear, before you talk about that, the vast majority of people that we have employed and worked in the past have been from people that we know as friends, have met socially, or have met like through something like Oxford Indies, right? Like the core people. And you're about to talk about how to find some more tertiary contractors, so please go ahead.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess so. I suppose people from the garage games community early on as well.
Yeah, IRC channels. Yeah. But Jim Eyre was a friend of Robin's brother, and
yes,
James Yu was from the IRC channel and Rich. I don't know.
Yeah,
school.
Rich and Martin, who worked on Frozen Cortex, were long-term friends of mine through particular friendship groups. So yeah, it's just generally people unfortunately, is the sad way that these things often work, which is not a good thing to say to someone who's out there looking for contracting work. I know that, Luke, you're on the other side. You're probably trying to hire in contractors. The best thing to do is, I found actually recently, going to a lot more events and so on, there are some very talented people out there who are quite good at networking at events and will say, I'm an artist, I do this, and they can show you. So yeah, just being around is good. Talking of Martin Binfield, he's actually asked a question, and he says, what is your favourite stupid cheat mode in a game? Now, that's quite a difficult question. I used to put God mode and no clip on in Quake 1, and then just run around, like fly around through the levels, kind of landing in different rooms and shooting stuff. That was pretty stupid, but I enjoyed that.
I quite liked paintball mode in GoldenEye. That was quite fun. I mean, I liked the real cheats in GoldenEye.
Yes.
We've definitely lost the art of the cheat. That doesn't really exist very much anymore.
Well, I think now with mods, that's really kind of gone. I mean, when I think about the most ludicrous thing, the thing that always sticks in my mind recently is that Thomas the Tank Engine Skyrim mod.
Oh, yeah.
Where the dragon comes down and it's just Thomas the Tank Engine and it makes that train whistle noise. That's just... no one's going to beat that. Whatever beats that for a comedy mod, I want to see it. Right, that's the end of the entire show. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been quite an epic show this week, but a very enjoyable one nonetheless. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm Mode7Games. He's Ian Hardingham, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.